So this event's all about crisis comms. The first one was content. This is crisis comms. I thought it was relevant, just given the amount of questions that are going around at the moment in terms of Facebook changing their algorithm and letting war comments run wild if they're not sort of monitored, and brand hijackings all over the place and that sort of stuff. So when I thought of that concept or title, or sorry, subject for the event, the first two people to come to mind for me in terms of speakers was Chris Gross, who for the past 2 years has been head of social at Vodafone and dealt with Vodafone sort of firsthand, 4 years, sorry. And Miss Cara Pring as well, she essentially had to clean up quite a bit of the Qantas luxury stuff last year firsthand. So both of them are really, really experienced, I guess, in the space of dealing with big brands and crises on Facebook when that occurs. Before I hand it over, you've probably all noticed little booklets that we've handed out. There's 5 basic tips in there to write better content, but the real reason is because we want you guys to check out a product we've built over the last sort of 18 months called Blue Blocks. It's not ready yet, it's still in a beta format, but you can go to that URL, sign up, and we'll send you an invite probably next week when it's working. Awesome.
Vodafone for 4 years. I left there 3 months ago. I moved over to Fox Sports. I'm the head of social media and digital marketing over there now, which is awesome because I love sport, so it was pretty sweet. But the 4 years at Vodafone was certainly good fun and taught me a lot. I wonder when I talk, so this guy's going to have a super hard time if he's trying to zero in on me. We're talking about crisis management. Let me get down to it. As Mike said, it's informal. Jump in and ask questions if you've got them. I might just say, hey, I'm going to get to it. And that might either be a really good tactic to just not answer your question, or it might actually be true. So if it was the former of that, make sure you call me on it afterwards. And if not, hopefully I answer it. I think there's 2 types of things in crisis management when we talk about this, and we don't always think about it in this way, but it's really, really, really important to think about the 2 type of ones. And that's largely that there's self-inflicted and then there's unplanned, okay? Self-inflicted is us shooting ourselves in the foot. It is because we're trying to tick a box to fit inside some type of marketing plan. There's a host of other reasons. I'll get into some of those later. But it's really something that can be avoided. You know, you're probably staring down the barrel and sometimes you're like, oh, I don't know which way this will go, but maybe maybe we'll give it a go. Maybe we'll sell some pajamas or promote some pajamas. And maybe we shouldn't, and that's why it's self-inflicted. The other one is unplanned. Look, that is a larger business force. That is at play there, something that certainly was not meant to happen, but something breaks, blows up, stops working, starts striking, whatever the matter is, it's not something that you can actually have direct control over in terms of if you work in social media or around it. And that's really important because in there are some things you can do to prevent it, and hopefully I get to it. But a lot of it is actually out of it's out of your control. So then it's about how do you react to it. So at the start, I'm going to talk about the self-inflicted stuff. Okay, I'm going to talk about how it comes about. Because if we think about how it comes about, then what we'll get out of the points is how to prevent it from happening and what not to do in that regard. Really common one around it is it's because the process of the campaigns largely that happen within this or comms or whatever it is are done in isolation. What do I mean by isolation? It might be that it's coming up by an agency that is the above the line agency and they're pushing it down through the digital channels and then into social. It might be done where social people are sitting there and the people who are day to day and really close to the community are sitting there, but they're not actually conscious of these bigger things going on. It could be layoffs or whatever that's affecting that company. A lot of the time within that, the common part there is that there's separation between people who are coming up with ideas, making decisions about communications versus the people that are living and breathing the community. The big part in there is that they need to be connected. A lot of this stuff I see that there's just clearly a disconnect that if one of those parties had have actually calibrated, I think things would have been fine. It wouldn't have necessarily gone the way it was. The other part is the people have got their head down a bit too much. And by that I mean, think about some of your brands that you might work on and how long that planning process takes, and right through from briefing and research and yada, 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 all the way through to execution. And you know, fantastic brands like Coca-Cola, who don't have to really deal with much of this stuff largely, their planning processes last as long as 18 months. That's ideally how far out that they're working. And obviously most aren't like that. You're like, shit, I'd be happy to have a couple months. And that's fine, and that's fine too. The thing is, everything can change in a couple months. And a lot of the time people are sitting there and whatever your comms or your execution was, yeah, it looked great when you're over here, but you know what? Something's completely changed. You should not be doing that. When we think about examples like, and Cara will talk about it more, the Qantas one, I think that was and hopefully Cara can give some insight into that. That's a you know, an idea that came out. To me, that was an example of where you're kind of going, hang on, someone didn't calibrate and just gone, there's all these strikes going on. For us to talk about luxury right now, let alone try and give away some pajamas, isn't the best thing to be doing here. To think about it like that, when I was at Vodafone back at the end of 2010, when the network stuff was really starting to kick us, and early 2011, you know, we decided that we weren't going to run the network campaigns about how good our network was at that time. Got to kind of stick your head up and go, hang on, not appropriate for now, we're only going to inflame people. The common thing that it comes down to here is that you just got to use your common sense for a lot of this stuff. When you're thinking about, I know it's a bit of a cop-out to say this, but you just need to stop, step back. People that view your work as art, it isn't. It's got a business purpose, and it's sure as fuck not to drive bad PR. So be able to sit back and just use your common sense about, you know, really what is this going to achieve? The great one that I like to do is best case and worst case scenarios within here. What's the best case? You know, that we get like maybe 1,000 likes. That's pretty cool. That's about the best case, and maybe we'll throw in some shares in there for good measure. And it's like, and what's the worst case of that? And you go, if you're starting to feel that thing in your stomach there when you're talking about the worst case scenario, the big sign, that's your common sense saying, no, it's not worth it. There isn't the way off in the opportunity there. All right, so let's talk about unplanned. Unplanned is probably more where I've had experience in. I can tell you right now, it certainly was not in our business plans to have the challenge in the network and then customer service that we did. I should say that, yeah, we did. That's right in English. When I was at Vodafone, and it was one of those things that we then had to kind of react very quickly to. So how do we deal with unplanned stuff? You know, that wasn't someone in the social media team who accidentally kicked over the network cord and everything went to shit. It's a much wider business problem. And the other thing within here, and it's really important to differentiate, is that's a problem in that case where it's not that simple where you just flick on a switch and it's done. It's like, oh yeah, okay, whoops. It's actually a challenge that you're going to have to work through versus something that can kind of have an immediate impact that you can go and take that action. To that point, what I talk about a lot of the time with social media, it's an important one important point to make, is that we talk about external communication. It's external communication with our customers or with your audience. The thing that it's got a shadow, and very rarely it does, and this is the most common mistake I believe in organizations in social media, is that the shadow of internal action doesn't sit there. It's all just siloed away from it. By that, what I mean is, do product managers get the top line feedback on what's happening around their products? What's changed? Do they? Do they all get it? Are they all 100% across it? And I don't mean as well in a way that you're hitting them with here, read, 500 comments that are about cats and dogs, and there's a couple way down there about your product. I mean, giving them some actionable insights. And very rarely does that happen, and it's a really important thing. Probably something I learned the most about it and something that we adapted to Vodafone at. So in that regard, what I'm going to kind of run through here is a bit of a what not to do if crisis drops on you. Obviously, we'll talk in a little bit about how we can mitigate it, but these are some things that definitely what not to do, so obviously how you can do it. The big thing is pretend that nothing happened. Don't pretend that nothing happened within this stuff. We look at, there's a bunch of examples. Vodafone definitely was one where the old way was, let's just try and sweep this under the rug, nothing happened, everything's fine, network's fine, customer service fine, everything's fine. We live in a connected world where it is so easy just to show those problems yourselves, whether it's screen grabs of how long you've been waiting on a call for, or your network signal. Obviously, network signals, that's very specific to a telco. But from a customer care perspective, how long you've been waiting on the phone? Anyone with customer care that's got a phone line, yep, bang, you got a customer care problem. I've been waiting online for 47 minutes. Very easy to show these type of things. So you've got to be really kind of conscious that, everything leaves a trail nowadays. You can't just pretend nothing happened. The big thing on that is because it just pisses everyone off. Once you piss people off in that way, I can guarantee you they will rally and form together against you. Vodafone didn't listen and Vodafail started. Vodafail, for those that didn't know, started in January in 2011. It was a forum, a very haphazard forum called Vodafail.com, or maybe it was .net or dot something. Essentially what they did was very rudimentary forum where people just went on there and kind of complained within it. So they banded together, they found their own way to talk about what they wanted to talk about because we weren't prepared to have that conversation. I should say that it was advised obviously to have that conversation, but the powers that be decided not to. And that really sank us from it. By the time we actually went, okay, you know what? Something did happen and we're willing to talk about it, the damage is already done. Next point on that stuff is, and this is a big thing, is ignore the early warning. Largely on any of this, anything, I would say, there is some form of early warning. How are you, as people that are responsible in different aspects for brands, how are you figuring out what your early warning system is? Do you have one? I could shock you to say what we already had early warning about the network from social media alone at Vodafone. What have you got? Tracking and measuring tools, largely this stuff comes down to. How are you analysing increase in volume? How is that on a certain topic? How are you relaying that over sentiment? How is all of this stuff changing on a week-by-week basis? What are the pockets and areas that are talking about it? Do you know what channels, when information goes through, do you know what channels will talk about things first? How long does it take to actually get to somewhere like Facebook? It takes a long time, by the way, to get to somewhere like Facebook. Thinking about these type of things and knowing, you can actually have the signs there months in advance. If not, let's look about it on a smaller scale. Mike talked about these things where with the way that Facebook algorithms change things up, suddenly you're getting like these posts that bang have got like tens and tens of thousands of likes in like no time. How can you be doing it so as you're looking at that thing when it's only a few thousand likes and getting a response out, as opposed to when it's hitting 60, 70,000 likes and you're like, I think we might try and do something there. There's ways on this stuff. It's not hard. It all can be set up in ways that automated and will come back and flag to you, or you need people there looking at it. Either way, operationally, there's definitely tools there that can help for both this. The other part of that I said is something that we introduced at Vodafone was something called localized reporting. Well, that's what I called it. What that was, different aspects of the business we would give a report to. I kind of briefly talked about it before, which essentially was all the data that's irrelevant to them, everything about cats and cricket teams and whatever else would just get pulled out of that report, and it was only about their stuff, only their keywords within that, and there's some smarts around that, and so they could start to see what's changing, why is it changing, where's that conversation being had. The big part on it is sentiment. ultimately with that was a great thing, because as a tool, what we were giving those different areas of the business was a catalyst to have a conversation and make change with people in their team, because we'd send out those reports to the people who could effectively make change, and we'd also send one to the director of that area. And if that director didn't see stuff change on a week-by-week basis based off those reports, it gave them something to I won't say crack heads with, something to have a conversation with about someone and kind of say, you know, what's going on there. The last part on that one is don't follow organizational instinct, which is largely to just freeze when some of these things happen. It's to go back to, you know, PR where you could control media to some regard and, you know, say, no, nothing's happening. And that's a really bad one, and it's a big challenge, because ultimately these decisions, when it really kicks up a gear, they're being made at the top levels, okay? So to follow organizational instincts, they're going to at the top level, because they're bloody good at what they do all the way up, and they, you know, they've been doing it for a long time and have a lot of experience within it. So your role within that isn't to try and affect the organizational instinct when everything goes to shit and Godzilla comes. You've got to try and do it beforehand. You've got to try and show your wins beforehand. The people are looking at social media data and actually going, you know what? This is fair. I can actually judge my business on this. We always used to say that sentiment, complete transparency for social media sentiment of what people were thinking of the business at any time. And I think that's more than NPS. Net Promoter Score, sorry, for those that don't know it, is the way that you measure recommendation. It's a score given between 0 and 10. 9 and 10, you got a promoter, someone who likes your brand. 7 and 8, someone who's neutral. And 0 to 6 is someone that's a detractor. And for me, those measures, it takes a while. I think there's a bit of lag in those numbers. Sentiment was a great one. We could always figure out where it was, what was changing. So you've got to get them to buy in at the start that they can trust social media in that regard, and also, if something happens, what they need to do. One other thing within the organizational part, and that is that there's just this one where it's just like, if it never happened, we can just delete it all. I got asked to delete Facebook once. I'm not going to say where I was. Could have been when I was before Vodafone. I was working at a digital agency then. But I got asked to just like, can you just delete Facebook? Just call up Zuckerberg, just tell him to kill this thing. Which I kind of thought about, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to even start there. All right, so how do we mitigate against these things? It's like all good and well. You can't kind of stop it. You know, I wish I could go back in time and built up the network a bit more and done some other things or done whatever, but how do we do it? First one that you need to do, and this is whether it is from a business perspective, and this is regardless of whether it is something that you can, you know, shoot yourself in the foot, the self-inflicted, versus the stuff that's wider. First thing that you need to do, regardless of that stuff, is scenario planning. What happens if Catzilla comes? Yeah, you got to figure out what your worst case scenario is. And there's a bunch of scenarios you can run through within this stuff. The big thing on this though is there are so many variations of what Catzilla, Godzilla, whatever other type of Zilla that can be, that you can literally waste way too much time planning on this stuff. Stick to the top line ones, because there's going to be so many variations that you're never going to nail it. It's too hard to. But stick to the top line ones. It's more about the process there of what you're doing versus really whatever furry creature is coming at you. The next part on that is you got to know when to hit the button. When is something crisis within it? And that's a challenge. My suggestion, and how we did it at Vodafone, is that we predetermined a spike in volume, a change in sentiment equates to hit the button, and we did it beforehand. Because when you're kind of sometimes sitting there, you're like really optimistic. It depends if you're optimistic or pessimistic person. I'm largely an optimistic person. You're sitting there and be like, no, it's cool. This is just the bad bit, and then it's going to get good. And you'd be like, no, we can just add a little bit more to it, and it'll be fine. And it isn't how it's going to work. You need to set those marks up front. The other thing, if you set those marks up front, is that you can automate it so as you can notify people. So if it happens on Boxing Day, or if it happens on Easter long weekend, as both of those instances happen with Vodafone, then people suddenly know about it and you haven't just got a couple of people who are looking through it. The other part within here, and this was more just my ability because I love this photo to try and get it in there, but it's really important from a social media perspective, is just like if you are in the social media team, particularly if you're in a leadership area of that, and I either mean that directly as a manager or someone who is, managing the social media team higher, and you've got a lot of things within it, you've got to be cool in that regard. Don't lose your shit. A few times we kind of saw in some cases where that really caused worry and anxiety for people within the organisation when a couple of the team were kind of going a bit crazy over what was happening. It's okay. A big part on that, and I'll get to it later as well, is to quickly touch on it, is a lot of this stuff is a storm in a teacup. A lot of it isn't, and you don't want to get the things mixed up. But a lot of this stuff that happens, and when I talk about a lot, I mean the stuff that's the self-inflicted, is actually a storm in a teacup. And the only people who give a shit or notice are narky people working in social media in this country. They are the only ones, because they can fill their blog and they can fill their tweets with it and they can have an opinion. And it's all good and well, and I don't begrudge them for doing that stuff, but it is a storm in a teacup. So the challenge is, though, that we're connected to it, because you've got people in your team, or you are, or whoever, that listen to these people regularly, and they're like, holy crap, they're talking about it on their blog, and like, this is going to be all over the news, and it's like, you need to really kind of be conscious. Again, to an earlier one, come back to those measurements. Yeah, okay, but is it like, have you got, 100 plus tweets? Has it got, this in this amount of time? Exclude some of the industry news stuff. Really important on that one. The other one in that regard is you've got to be quick. A lot of the time, the problem is, and this comes back to the planning, is that you're not quick enough to it. If you planned right and you know what the process steps are, then you can be quick. Big thing on that, and a tip I would give, is that you've got to give SLAs on responses. So once you push the button, we would have 15-minute ones. If you don't get this person and you try 3 times and you leave a text message, you move on to this person. You don't get this person, within an hour, you were calling the CEO, no matter who you were within it. So you need to be able to figure that out. So as you're not actually creating any roadblocks, any bottlenecks there, we're just going to remove through a process that we're putting over the top, making sure that it's well articulate, everyone knows what it is. But we are able to move really, really quick. A lot of these things is about how much damage that's going to be inflicted. It's going to be coming back to how quick were you within it. I can promise you that one. Vodafone, we weren't quick enough in our external response within it. We let that one sit for ages, way too long, and that really hurt us. Some of the other examples that that I imagine we'll talk about at some point today will be a classic example of just not being quick enough. Last point before I formally ask for some questions, since no one's been kind enough to give me a break so I can drink a beer by asking a question. I remember that, thank you very much. Is what I said about our industry, and I touched on it before, and that is that we're in our infancy in social media within this country, 100%. And what we need to do a better job of, and it isn't a jab at anyone in this room by any stance, but it is how we all should act, is that we need to set a bit of a better example in terms of getting each other's backs. There's a lot of stuff, and as I said again, it's all the shoot yourself in the foot type of ones where it's just some campaign that doesn't quite hit the mark or whatever, or some little response that we blow way out of proportion, and we're actually doing ourselves and I talk about a social media industry, those that are working within it, we do ourselves more harm than good. And we gotta get a bit better at just holding back some of those comments in a public-facing one because there are people that read that stuff that might be in the wider digital or media industry stuff, and they might take notice of this. But really, we're doing disjustice to ourselves. On that uppity note, I had about 20 minutes, which for once I actually kind of stuck to, so I'm kind of proud about that. I usually shit on and on. Any questions?
I'm just interested in your the model where you conceptualize, and I think pretty much everyone does it, that you're in standard mode of operation versus crisis mode of operation.
Yeah.
Now, I work for an agency. We don't
Yep.
have to go into, a government agency.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to go into which one.
Okay.
And I don't know if that's just the way that we view the world and
Yeah.
our particular perspective, but I tend to see it more as you have multiple threads or modes of operation which are running all the time. There's a level at which we deal with everything in crisis mode,
Yeah.
and it's just a question of the volume.
Yeah.
And that doesn't stop us from doing the other proactive, creative type stuff, which is
Yeah.
also running in parallel.
Yeah.
And again, you'd scale it up or down.
Yeah.
So I just wonder what your thoughts are about running that way and what it means to be in crisis mode. Because we try to get that speed when we see that there's you could call it a threat, a brand threat if you like, that comes up, that we try to get onto that, and it's very quickly, and it's really only a question of how much energy we have to apply. And if you get in early, it's not very much, or if it's an issue that's containable, and if you've waited, or for some reason it's very explosive, it can take greater effort. And just in the last week, we've had 2 potentially enormous crises, which turned out not to be crises, or at least not for us, because of how we were able to do that. So I guess from a devil's advocate point of view, I'm just challenging whether there really are different modes that you flip from one to another, as opposed to doing that schizophrenic thing of running a couple simultaneously, just pretty much permanently.
Yeah. Yeah.
And is that more the reality, or do you think that there is, to the extent that you might agree with that, what does it really mean then to flip over to the crisis mode?
Yeah, I think, let me try and answer. I got about 6 things in there that I'm trying to get to, so I'm going to probably forget pretty much 95% of it. I think on the one, it depends where in the organisation that you are, the ability to do the schizophrenic multitasking, and this is just another element that you're multitasking, versus kind of stopping something and working on it. I know that multitasking, the stats that I've seen from it is you're 40 to 50% less productive when you multitask. So I would much rather focus my team on fixing something and fixing something properly. It'll also depend on the scale of how big it is. Because if it is big and it's ongoing, and I'll use, for example, the Vodafone network stuff. If we had have let the creative people go about doing the campaigns that they're doing, and they're doing something that is not conscious of the fact of what's going on, and you should stick well away from the network, and you should also stick away from a bunch of other points that resonate from that, then I'd say we're doing them a massive injustice, and their work's going to be off. So I think it's that communication layer there. You said an interesting word which just kind of triggered something in my head, which I forgot within this thing, which is proactiveness. In a crisis, proactiveness from the brand and communications can be absolutely awesome. It can be absolutely fantastic way to drop volumes of incoming stuff of people asking about it. If you know that you are getting, let's say, 1,000 people writing on your Facebook wall a day, and 90% of it's on one issue, why the fuck aren't you just sending out a Facebook post 1 or 2 times a day with that? That's the way that you need to start thinking, is we can stop all that volume in. It's like, yeah, but we don't want to broadcast that stuff, and we'd rather work reactively. And it's like, that's one of those challenges. When it's at a stage everyone knows that it's a problem, I think you're much better off freeing up your resources to then focus on the ones that you can make a big difference for, as opposed to trying to get to 1,000 ones. What else was your point within it? Did I answer, or did I just kind of start making up another point?
Maybe the other thing to draw out is, what do you see as being crisis mode?
Yeah.
How is that different to your normal mode?
Yeah. Crisis mode isn't fun. My normal mode's usually pretty fun. That's for sure. Look, I think it comes down to the organisation. People define it in different ways. If it's something that flows up onto getting media lines and all the rest of it, I'm talking traditional media. People might define that's crisis. For me, the definition operationally is that all I do is focus on that. And that's the thing. If that's the click that it makes. Anything else is, I'm solving a problem, or we like to call them challenges. A lot more positive. Though when it's crisis mode, that is all that we're focusing on. And you should also, because of that, get access immediately to whatever that you need within the organisation in terms of access to people. Because when I come back to one of those earlier points around the be quick thing, if I'm holding up an approval from an exec or whatever else it was from a Vodafone perspective, I could literally, if we're in crisis mode, walk in the door, any meeting he's in, just go, come, deal with this, can you approve this now? Because I know you're in it now. Okay, fine, out, done, and that's okay. If I'm doing that in normal mode, he would have kicked me in the shins and told me to fuck off, which would have been fair enough. So it's that type of thing, and then defining it then I think comes down to your organisation. Comes down to, I think, how it's going to affect bottom dollar.
Going into that question, like with Vodafone, where was the point where you guys decided you have to push the button? How did you figure that out?
The challenge was that we had different definitions of pushing the button, organisationally. So I think I'd been sitting there, myself and the head of PR had been sitting there for a while going like, is this thing fucking plugged in? And that didn't necessarily translate to the rest of the business. So we were pushing it early. I think the one where it becomes really obvious is when it gets when press, traditional press jump onto it. When you're hitting like front pages of the paper, that's kind of hard for the wider organisation to miss. You'd hope. And so, I think that's it. It comes down to, and that was a big learning for us, and speaking to people who are at Optus and Telstra, they said they learned a lot from it. They thanked us for it, and I was like, you're welcome. You're welcome. I'm glad I could do you that justice. That you really need to be lined up about how you define those things, and then what are the actions that come from it. People have got a day-to-day job that they need to be doing, and KPIs that they need to deliver and work against. So when you pull the cord, press the button, whatever it is, that's a metaphor. There wasn't a button. I just want to be clear. Then you've got to be conscious that you're doing it, and it's very serious, and people have got to react to it. The challenge is when what you're talking about isn't something that is necessarily consumer facing in a comms way, because a lot of the things that we're talking about here, PR can actually just handle. When it actually works into the rest of the wider business, they're not used to running in this way. They're not used to doing this stuff. They're like, what? Like, we didn't have a network communications specialist before this stuff. And then so trying to get information out of someone who builds networks was hard. I've spoken to video gamers a bunch before, and people that make mobile phones, and people who make networks are like on a way, they are like super duper smart. And a lot of the stuff that we're saying, we're just like, I need a translator. So, it's that type of challenge.
I just wanted to ask about the size of your team. Did you put on extra resources, and what sort of coverage did you have at that time?
Yep, good question. We had, I believe in the end of 2010, we had, sorry, I'm just counting. think we had 10 in the team, including myself. Organisationally, we were split. Customer care was down in Kingston. That's Tasmania, not Jamaica. I would have had some great work trips. It was in Jamaica. And then head office in Sydney. And I'd be in Kingston probably once every month or two, working down there. Those guys quickly got run off their feet. To give you the idea of the scale of how much, by I think March we were up to 30. So the team had tripled. And by the time I left, we were sitting at around 36, 37. What we found out is that's in direct social media team. Teams that service that team grew a lot as well. Think about coaching, knowledge management as a team as well. So that really grew a lot. What we learnt from that and what we mitigated against moving forward was that when something happens like this, it takes about 8 weeks to get someone up to speed in social. You know, we don't sit there natively using Facebook. You're sitting there using tools that actually make it efficient and make our people accountable for the work that they do, and also help them to do it, you know, well, the efficiency part and, you know, all the rest of it. So you actually need to teach someone how to use these tools. They're pretty easy to use, largely, but you need to teach them how to use them, teach them how to use the knowledge management, teach them how to speak in the tone of voice of the brand and how that changes. When I talk about localizing, localizing is we'd also localize our tone of voice to speak in different ways in different channels that are appropriate for it. How we'd speak in Whirlpool and what we could get away with, vastly different to Facebook, vastly different to Twitter and all the rest of it. The operational learning for that was that there's another team that's email, the correspondence team. They all got trained up now in all the social stuff of how to use everything, because when we talk about the flow through of a crisis, we know social gets hit first, and we know emails are the last thing to get hit. It'll be social, then it'll be telephony, and then it'll be email. So there is a part where we can use those guys into social and bring them in and essentially triple the size of the team like that.
Right. And what were the hours of operation?
8 to midnight, and then weekends it was 9 to 5:30. We toyed with the 24/7 thing. There just wasn't enough. Maybe if we had more international people, that was the only stuff that we'd see, was international. But besides that, yeah, everyone's chilling. That's right. Yeah.
Hi.
Hey.
What programs were you using to assign posts or assign assignments to each of the teams in Tasmania, and how was it split?
At the start, Radiant 6, and we were doing them in stacks by channel. That was our 5th tracking and measuring tool, by the way. Then what we had built out was Radiant 6 into Social Hub, which is able to define what the content is about, where it's from, all these other things. So what that gave us the ability to start to do is, instead of assigning work by channel, so like let's chuck a few people on Facebook and a few on Twitter and a few on the community and a few over here and all the rest of it, what we could actually start to do is, let's give you all the network questions because you're awesome at it. Let's give you all the Apple questions. We're going to give this person over here all the questions about, you know, how to restart your mobile broadband, whatever else it was. Important thing is that we give them 90%, not all 100%, because they still need to cross-skill. But that's a spot that we'd starting to get into. And then tying around that is the knowledge management system. But ultimately, they're sitting on Salesforce.
And how many people did you have like traffic managing at the top? Was it just you? Just you?
No.
No one?
None.
So you had it automated? Or?
Don't make bottlenecks. People can come in and reassign. What do I need? It's something I was like, I always thought I needed that role where it was like, no, we need the triager. I was like, firstly, it's a fucking cool name. Like I watched ER as a kid and like triage was cool. And I thought we needed that role. You don't need a triager. Like people can see that stuff and then just reassign through the line. Absolutely. It's an easy one. Yep.
So you mentioned like sort of not sticking to organisational sort of culture in terms of crisis management. How did you sort of get around that?
I dare say I didn't at the start because we weren't quick enough. And it's easy in that stuff, like I don't make an excuse and say like, well, we did the recommendation and then they just didn't listen to it. And it's like, no, that's a bullshit, that's a cop-out. My role within it should have been to, you know, actually educate them more at the start. Hindsight, I'd never realised that I needed to do that, or I'd hoped that I would never need to. But, you know, that's what it is. Later down the track, it was a big thing of we'll speak our own language. So it would be around really trying to demystify and just speak normally to someone, which I struggle to do in terms of I'd be saying all the social media jargon. The other part, and to that extent as well, is that we gave them a single view. So I'm not breaking down Facebook, Twitter, and It's just like one view, so they can kind of see everything. And I could, yes, I'm seeing other things and other people are getting different reports, but ultimately it's just really kind of making it simple in that regard. The other thing I think that helped was we did a few things where we predicted. I said, no, if we do it this and, you know, I think we're going to see something completely different. And this would be what my recommendation was. And there was a good one we had just before Easter. The prepaid recharging went down. And we're like, fuck. And it was like, hang on, let's just zero rate everyone. Fuck it, let's zero rate everyone and let's go out to everyone and say, everyone on prepaid, you got free calls for the next 24 hours, go nuts, enjoy yourself. And I went, you're all right. We did that. Literally, that is the only time we've ever seen a negative turn into a positive. Besides that's a myth. It's one of the biggest social media myths going around, the whole negative turn into a positive. That was the only exception to the rule in that regard. And it won a lot of, brownie points that, you know, we're able to predict and kind of say, hang on, it's going to change in this way, which by the way, I think is probably the most obvious thing ever. But we just kind of said it, you know, like people will be happy to get free calls and they won't be pissed off that they can't pay to do it. And that's fine. Any other questions? Yep.
When you're in crisis mode, do you have a strategy against pushing out new content?
Yep, that's the localized.
Or daily posts?
It's the localized bit. Yeah, it's all you got to go sit and just go have the things change. Again, come back to your rules, all right? So you set up rules within this and you're saying if 50% of your content coming in is about X, how should we be changing how we push out Y? Definitely think you should be. It comes back to that thing of the ignore. If you're just like going about your business and it's like, I try and think about this always in a physical way, is because then you kind of get it and you're like, wow, that is ridiculous. How could we be doing that? If you had you were sitting at a shop counter and there's like 20 people on the side of someone going like fucking yelling at them, and the person's just sitting there and they're just like next and they're just pushing it out and all the rest of it, you'd just be like, this is madness. So yeah, you got to stop within it. Again, it's not a complete art form. Ultimately, you know, you got to be customer focused.
Yeah. And do you cease like communication
No.
and posting, or you just change the
You just change it
to suit the people yelling at the window?
You change, but you might change the frequency.
Yeah.
But you know, definitely remain. It just depends how it goes. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank
I've
you.
got a couple of questions, but we'll ask them later.
Sweet. I got a top up.
Thanks to Chris, everyone.
Hopefully what I lack in preparation I can make up for in stories, because I think though I only worked at Qantas for 8 months, it's kind of the equivalent in crisis management terms in social media as about 10 years, because during the time that I was there, it was basically one crisis after another. And I think during my time there, I kind of came up with 3 different social media crises that you can face, and I had them all basically while I was there. And I think the first one that I encountered, which happened basically about a month after I started, was just an environmental crisis that plays out in social media, mainly because it's the best channel for communications, I guess. And so that was when there was the ash cloud, which you probably all heard about, and it grounded a lot of our flights, particularly around New Zealand. So I wasn't there for the European one, but I was there for the New Zealand ash cloud that affected Australian domestic flights and flights to New Zealand. And as you can imagine, when flights are affected, people get very emotional, frustrated, upset, because flights either mean business or they mean holidays, two of things which are very important to people. So you can imagine how people react quite strongly when their flights are grounded, and even more so if there's no clear idea when those flights are going to resume. So that was the first crisis that I encountered about a month or so after I started at Qantas. And I think this is the one example that we can say that we actually did a good job in. And I think that comes down to, and probably the first point that I would kind of stress in terms of talking about how to manage crisis within social media, or crises within social media, is that staff were empowered, and management basically looked to the social team, which essentially was me, and then I had some support people, for advice and gave us the power to handle the crisis. And I think that's why we handled it really well, because when you empower the people whose job it is to look after your social communities, you're entrusting the people who care about the people who are on those communities. So once you start talking to the media team or higher management, they care on a general sense about customers and how they're perceived, but they don't care as much about those communities that you develop a strong relationship with. You know, I was talking on a daily basis to people. I got to know, you know, we had thousands and thousands of people talking to us, but I got to know a lot of those people, and you actually start to build a bond with your communities. And I think that's part of the reason why you want to do the best job that you can. If you don't empower your staff to be able to talk to them and implement the right strategy, that's where things start to go wrong. And I'll get to an example of that in a minute. But with this particular example, basically we implemented not quite a 24-hour a day, but like maybe 14 hours. I think it was about from 6 a.m. to 12 a.m. at night. We were on Twitter and Facebook answering people's questions and providing updates about what was happening. And sometimes that was that we had no information, and that frustrated people. But I think even when you have no information, let them know that you're still there. And I can sort of say, you know, from a recent example, if you followed the click frenzy thing, that was one of the problems that they had. And I recently wrote an article yesterday about that as well, because when that site went down and they had hundreds of thousands of people trying to access it, they literally stopped tweeting for 2 hours while their site crashed. So leading up to 7 p.m, they were out there saying, oh, 1 minute to go. And then the site crashed and they said nothing for 2 hours, because maybe they didn't know when the site was going to come up. Maybe they didn't know what was happening. I don't know what their excuse is. But the key there, I think, is even if you don't know, speak to the people, because, you know, people just want to know that you know that they're there and they're talking to you. So I think with the ash cloud, you know, we were there talking to people, you know, I think we exceeded the Twitter cap in tweets about 3 times. So literally they banned us for tweeting for, I think it's half an hour, because we'd tweeted too much. And we were constantly sending them updates. And we had someone in the crisis comms meetings at Qantas when this was happening. And as soon as a decision was made as to whether or not to ground like flights or that they were going to go ahead, we would be on Twitter. And so much so that it caused problems internally, because we were tweeting information before our customer service people in Tasmania were getting that information. So they'd be fielding calls and they would be saying, we don't yet know whether or not your flight's going ahead. And that person would be saying, well, hang on a minute, you just tweeted that that the flight's cancelled. So what are you talking about? And that caused a whole heap of other issues. So I suppose one of the biggest learnings from that was we were too efficient, and that we needed to fix that feedback link in the company, because our customer service teams, you know, on traditional channels were getting information after our customers were through our channels. But on the pro side, when you're talking about changing a negative into a positive, the sentiment during that crisis was overwhelmingly positive, because we were doing such a good job. I think we developed a lot of customer loyalty during that time, because a lot of people were extremely appreciative at the effort that we were going to and the hours that we were working to provide them that information. And the level of personalization, I think, as well, you know, we tried to keep up to date with like who our customers were and what flights they were. You know, we would go to the website and look up their flight, even though they could do it themselves and that sort of thing. So I think we really went the extra mile. And as a result, you know, it was a thing about 80% positive sentiment, which is pretty outstanding. Like that's better than normal times for Qantas, I can tell you that. So we actually improved the usual sentiment rating during a time of crisis, which was pretty good. We also won a social media award, like a global social media award for that as well. So that was a good example of social media in crisis and using social media for comms during crisis for Qantas, but it was kind of probably the only good example during my time there. The second one that I was probably a part of was the grounding of the Qantas fleet. So I think that's when it's not the fault of social media and it's not necessarily to do with the social media as a channel, but it is your company's fault, or it's an issue with the brand, you could say. So it's not an external thing, it's your brand. So there's a lot of ill sentiment towards your brand because something that your brand's done, like Vodafone, their thing failed, that sort of thing. So I think it wasn't the fault of the social media team. We had nothing to do with it. In fact, we didn't even know about it because it was so confidential until it happened. But then it happened, and I was somewhat more upset because I had a holiday planned the next week to go to South America. And then all of a sudden my business class seat was taken because the flight before mine was cancelled. But that's another story. That was my own personal crisis. But I think the problem with this was, and I don't believe Qantas handled this very well, and the reason is they didn't get me involved. They didn't take my advice. They didn't get the social team on board. They decided that there was not really anything that they had to say, that it was a big legal issue, that, you know, it was so confidential and all that sort of thing. They weren't really going to say anything. And so what happened then was we had built this expectation from the ash cloud and the fact that, generally speaking, every day we spoke to thousands of, maybe not thousands, but hundreds of people that were talking to us. And then all of a sudden we put out everyone for a decision that was to do with the union. So people obviously weren't really on our side. It wasn't like the ash cloud. And then we didn't really want to talk. We didn't want to know anyone. Basically, we were silent. When I say we were silent, they put out like one post and a couple of tweets with the legally approved wording of that the flights have been grounded, but that was it. So naturally, as you can expect, there was a big backlash during that because we had so many people tweeting and posting and trying to talk to us, and no one was responding to them. We were just silent. And I think that is one of the worst things that you can do because it provokes people. They think, well, you've done this to me and now you just don't even care. And that's particularly when you're normally talking to people all the time and then all of a sudden you say nothing. So I think that was a big example of what not to do during a crisis. Even if there's legal issues involved, I think that you should be able to get the right approval to just talk normally to someone and say sorry. You don't have to go into too much detail about why the situation's occurred or what's happening. As long, if you just acknowledge them and say, look, we're really sorry, we'll give you more information when we have it at hand, it would have made a huge difference during that situation. So I was pretty, disappointed by the fact that they weren't really involving us during that. And I understand, that there was a lot of other things at play, but that hurt us during that crisis. Luckily, I then got to go on holidays the next week still, even though I didn't get my business class seat. And that was when I went over to South America for a month, and that was when Qantas Luxury happened. And I think I didn't even know about it because I didn't even have internet over there. And I guess this is the biggest kind of crisis that everyone knows Qantas for, and every time I speak to anyone and tell them, oh yeah, I used to work at Qantas, everyone's like, did you do Qantas Luxury? Did you do Qantas Luxury? And I almost feel disappointed to say, no, like I didn't actually do that, because it's sort of like they get so excited about it. But I think there's a few things that I would say about that, and my opinion about Qantas Luxury is not in line with the popular opinion. I actually don't believe it was the social media fail that everyone thinks it was. I think it became that, but I don't think it warranted the response that it got. But the first thing I'll say about it, and it goes back to my point that I was saying before about making sure you empower your staff, but also making sure you have the right staff and making sure they're senior enough, I think. And that was my problem with Qantas, and I still think to some degree they have the same issue, and that is they weren't prepared to put someone in a social media manager role to really manage a team of people, because they don't know which department to put it in, and there's fighting between basically factions. But the problem was the role that was my role in charge of social media, I don't believe was at a level that it needed to be, and I still don't think they have that there. And I think companies fail to grasp the importance of social media within a company. They see it as sort of like, oh yeah, we kind of have to be in there to tick a box, and we know it's important and stuff, but get an intern to do it or whatever. Like, it's just, writing 140 characters and playing on Facebook all day. How hard can it be? And I disagree, obviously, with that really strongly. I think you need to make sure that the right people with the right kind of experience and qualifications and knowledge and strategic ability are behind that, and that you do plan, as Chris was talking about, really well. And we had very clear crisis plans in place and response frameworks and things like that. So I think, we had covered our bases there. But the problem was I went away and they got the graduate to look after social media whilst I was away, and she had no experience, you know what I mean? And it was just like, I left and I was like, can I at least train her? And they're like, oh, we don't have time because these people are on holidays and she has to do their job. And whilst I probably shouldn't be talking too much about this, but I think from my side, I was so frustrated when I went on holidays, because I thought, is that what you see, how little social media is important to the business, that I go away and you put someone who has no, and I don't think she did a terrible job when I went away. I think she did a fine job, but I think that's why these things happen when you get things like Qantas Luxury, because you don't have the right people with the right strategy behind it. And that's what one of the key things I think is, that companies don't understand how important that role is. And ultimately that's why I left Qantas, because they weren't prepared to put that role at the level that it needed to be, right? So I was not going to stay there for that long. But I think also with Qantas Luxury, my opinion of it is, it wasn't a great campaign. It wasn't well worded probably. But from my perspective, I think one of the things that you have to take away from working for particularly big companies is it's going to happen. And when I started at Qantas, I said that. I said, it's going to happen one day. We're going to post something. We're going to say something. It's going to be an innocent reply, and shit's going to hit the fan. And I honestly think if you have enough followers or fans, or if you have enough exposure, if you're not just like a mum and dad store, it will happen. And that's why you need to plan. And you need to stay cool, as Chris said, and you need to have the right people in place that when it does happen, you can contact straight away, media people, especially management, all that kind of thing, to get the right information and be, because it will. And I think Qantas Luxury, whether it was bad timing or whether it was, a silly prize or a bad hashtag, whatever your opinion is on how terrible the campaign was, I think it was always going to happen, because people hated Qantas because we ruined their holidays and we ruined their businesses for, all that time. And largely the company was unapologetic for it, really, when you think about it. And so people were angry with us. And it wasn't about social media. It wasn't about our team, although obviously we didn't do a great job doing the grounding, but it was just ill sentiment towards the brand. And I think whether or not we'd have run a competition, well, we'd run competitions before that one. People said, oh, like, you didn't read the signs, and there was negative sentiment. But actually, when I left, which was only a week after the grounding happened, sentiment was back to normal. Conversation on social was back to normal. People still hated us, but they don't spend every day talking about hating Qantas. Like, they get on social media, you get over it, right? A day in social media is like a year in other channels. So from my perspective, I think there was a lot of people that jumped on board, a lot of social media commentators and things like that were sort of saying, oh, like, it was really terribly planned and it was a stupid campaign and all this sort of thing. And that's fine. I mean, I can see where people are coming from. But from my perspective, I think it's really easy to look back on things and say, well, that was really dumb. Like, we would never have done that. But at the time, things like that get through the cracks. That campaign might have been run and thought up by a graduate, but it was approved. She didn't just type a competition and post it. It was approved. So I think, from my perspective, I just think it's probably going to happen at some point, even if you think you're that careful. And the key is to make sure that you have the right processes in place. And from my perspective, with when they posted that, whether or not it was a good campaign or not, they actually did do a good job of dealing with the crisis when it happened. So no one really paid much attention to it because it was all about all the negative and the funny tweets and stuff like that. But when it happened, I think it's about how you deal with it. And I think it's important that you don't ignore it, that you don't become defensive, and that you don't try, because that's what a lot of brands do. They become really defensive and they become arrogant, and then it's almost as if they're just provoking people more. I also feel like Click Frenzy did that exact thing as well, because they posted a post saying, obviously our website is not down because there's thousands of people on it now, when obviously it was down because there were thousands of people who couldn't get onto the website. So I think they actually did a really good job, and I wasn't there, it wasn't me who did it, but I think they actually did a really good job. They kind of made a few jokes at their own expense. They acknowledged that it wasn't appropriate. They didn't try and delete everything and deny it ever happened. They owned up to it. They said, look, we didn't mean to be offensive. They made a few jokes at their own expense and that sort of thing. They even, did a few of the tweets themselves and stuff. And I think that was a really good way to deal with it. It didn't help them that much in the end because the press kind of largely ignored what they did and just focused on what everyone else was doing. But I guess the learning would be from that, if you do something wrong, which inevitably may happen if you've got that enough people that might jump on board, just to deal with it in the right way. And that is, I think, by not being defensive and, owning it and just apologising and that sort of thing, and trying to not make light of it so that it puts people offside, but as much as you can. I think... that's kind of my opinion on the Qantas luxury, but I don't know if anyone else has any questions about it. Unfortunately, it wasn't me that ran the campaign, so you can't sort of like... But I did come back and work at Qantas after it, and I really honestly had no idea until I got back, because I was in the Galapagos Islands and I found this internet cafe and I hadn't had internet for about a week. And I went on there and there was this guy that I knew who did social media for Hungry Jack's, and he'd inboxed me on Facebook and said, hey mate, what's up with this? And like posted a link to, I don't know, Sydney Morning Herald or something. And I was like, oh. And then someone else had written me an email and said, oh, I saw what's happening with that. It was on Mumbrella. And I sort of thought, oh, okay, just thinking slow news day. Like I didn't really think anything of it. And then I got back and it was sort of like, oh yeah, that was, number one, like social media fail of the year. I think it was tipped in like 25,000 global blogs and had been on every kind of news channel, and I was like, okay, so I'm glad I missed that. But so if anyone's got any questions, shoot. No questions?
Do you think it would have worked in a different context?
What do you mean by different context?
So had the groundings not happened, had it just been business as usual, do you think that campaign would have worked?
I think that...
I've just turned up from the UK to not to what was this campaign?
Okay, well, I'm glad someone in the world hasn't heard of it. Okay, so a brief summary of it. Basically what happened was we grounded our fleet, and then this competition was just... There was a strategy in Qantas. It wasn't like a big committee that came, but the strategy was, if we have little stuff to give away, just run a quick Twitter competition. We normally would get 10 entries. Like it wasn't even like we would get hundreds. It would just be like, in the next 2 hours, tweet this with this hashtag to go in the draw to win a USB or like tickets to this or whatever. So in this particular case, they had first class pajamas. So when you fly in first class on Qantas, you get these fancy, really nice pajamas. And there was a bit of context to that because people loved them. And so we had a lot of people that we used to talk to about the Qantas pajamas, and people tweeted about them all the time and tweeted pictures of themselves in them and stuff. So everyone was always asking for a pair. So we managed to, I don't know, get 20 pairs of pajamas or something. So I'd actually run a competition already for the business class ones, but somehow they'd gotten first class ones. So they just thought they'd run a quick competition. And it was the thing that they asked was something about describe, I can't even remember what it was, something about describe, something to do with luxury and flying or something, and then the hashtag was Qantas luxury. So it was a bit, I think that's what the problem was, but in saying that, I think context had a lot to do with it, because really anything can go haywire if someone tweets something funny, right? So what happened was a couple of people tweeted something funny, and then that went viral, and then everyone jumps on board, which is how trending topics happen. So I think what happened was, if it hadn't have been for a couple of smart people that just jumped onto it and tweeted, it just would have gone past. And no one would have been the wiser, and there would have been no backlash or articles about how terrible the campaign was. And we had run 1 or 2 competitions, small ones again, prior to that. So after the grounding, but before that competition, and obviously nothing had gone wrong. So context-wise, yes, I don't think the hashtag was great, but I think if there wasn't all that ill sentiment towards the brand at that time, there probably wouldn't have been as much of a backlash, because obviously people were keen to get on and bash Qantas because, you know, they'd just ruined their honeymoon or whatever it might have been. So, you know, in no world was it going to win awards. Like, it was never going to be like an award-winning campaign, but I do think it had something to do with the timing. I just disagree that when people said, everyone was like, oh, it was terrible timing, there was negative tweets at that time, and I just think when would have been the right time, I don't know, because I still think 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months later, the same thing may have happened. Check.
Interesting. This is an observation and not specifically related to you, but I would like to get your opinion because you work in an area which had access to customer service. So currently, let's take an average customer. An average customer calling Telstra, calling Qantas, may not even reach the right person. Or if the average customer sends an email, may not get a reply back. But when an average customer makes a comment on social media or makes a complaint in social media, it's all of a sudden escalated, and all of a sudden that average customer gets a VIP treatment and the issue is resolved much quicker than, let's say, phone or email. So what's your view on that? Do you think it's sustainable? Do you think it will stay like that, or do you think it will become more mainstream and it won't make any difference?
It's a good question, and I hope that it will stay like that and that customer service will just be improved as a result. It's definitely the norm that you should complain via social media because it will get done quicker. And I think a lot of the reason is because social media based customer service teams are newer and they're more proactive and they've got more to prove and they're better resourced. And obviously that's the result of the fact that social media is public. So if someone calls you, there's no one seeing what they're doing. But if someone says something on social media, everyone can see that. So you want to make them happier. But it's also because those people on those teams are really keen to get out there and make a big difference, and they have better resources to do so because, you know, the company has put the budget towards it, and so they want to see it work. I don't think it just depends on whether or not people cotton on, because I don't think enough people are on Twitter in Australia at this point to be, you know, to make it, to reach volumes that are unsustainable for companies at the moment. But I'm hoping that social media in general, and not just from the point of using it as a customer service channel or doing customer service via social media, will improve customer service in general across the board. Because even if you're not trying to seek resolution via Twitter, for example, you might get on and complain about customer service that you've had on the phone or, you know, via email or whatever, that sort of thing. So I think in general, it hopefully will lead to a shift towards better customer service across the board, just because the importance of customer service is becoming even more, I guess, prominent, because, you know, you're getting so many negative tweets or Facebook posts, and management will actually pay attention to that, more so than if you tell them that today you had 10 calls where people were yelling at you. If you tell them you had 10 posts on your Facebook page that everyone could see and, you know, you were getting 10,000 likes, they'll pay more attention. So yeah.
Just jumping in on that point, I used to encourage the philosophy that I tried to push on Vodafone was that our best people should be on social media, and everyone always used to look at me funny, which was normal. And the reason why was, I said, we have this awesome person and they're on a phone. Who else besides that customer sees it and experiences it and could get deflection from it? No one, unless there's, you know, no one. No one's going to get that. Okay. Email, is that going to happen? Probably not. Like, seriously, no. You have a chance for deflection in social media, particularly forums, where you have accepted solutions. You have a chance for deflection. You should have your best people there because of that reason alone. It's actually not one-to-one, it's one-to-many. So I hope it doesn't go away. I hope it continues to improve. But I'm biased.
Awesome. Any other questions? One quick question for me. Do you know if it's improved over at Qantas since you left? Do you know if they've got someone who isn't an intern who is now doing your job and is sort of made it more professional given the scenario they went through earlier in the year and what they're doing?
I think they have more people now, which is good. I mean, the other thing was, whilst I was there, we were able to implement an actual customer care team, which made a huge difference because they had access to the systems to actually help people. And there's more people now doing it, and I think they've learnt a lot. I'm scared from what Chris was also saying that companies like Qantas are less likely to do things now because of, the industry basically and the press bagging them out all the time. So I think my worry is that, Qantas hasn't really done anything big really since I've left. I mean, not that they did anything, not that Qantas actually was big, and well, I didn't do that anyway. Not that they did much big things when I was there either, but I think the worry for me is that corporates get less and less likely to want to risk things and go out on a limb because they're worried of what's the worst case scenario. Well, in my opinion, the worst case scenario is always going to be, well, we could get a backlash, because you just never know when a backlash is going to come, because you just, someone latches onto something and it just goes, it goes haywire. So, I think that so far, I think they've been doing a good job. But since I left, I have not read about any crises, and maybe it was all just me. But yeah, no, and I know the people over there, and they are good people, and they do go to good lengths to hire the right people, and in particular for the customer care team. As well. So I think what Chris was saying is right. It's about making sure you get the best and the people that are really engaged in customer service as well. So.
Awesome. Any other questions?
I've got a question actually. I'm just trying to resolve in my own head before I ask the question properly. I'm coming from agency side, and I sometimes struggle. The client I'm working on at the moment is one of the two big retailers in Australia, so it can't be, it can be one or the other.
Yeah.
And previously, when I was back home in the UK, I was working on one of the major high street banks for the last couple of years. And what we struggled with is trying to work out the balance between brand messages and customer service messages, and also how to sort of organise those. And because it's going to be maybe through one channel, one account, or whichever media we're talking about. Do you have any idea how you can find that balance, or how you can?
When you say customer service messages, are you talking about
direct issues? So I can't find this product in the store. The guy was rude. You've missold my mortgage. Whatever.
So people talking to you, like complaints and stuff like that, and
really
feedback.
Trying to deal with these resolve in that basis. Yeah.
And then as opposed to just general marketing or brand or posts that you would do.
Saying,
well,
use a competition. Check out this recipe.
I think some brands choose to address that by separating the channels. So, for Qantas, for example, they have QF Customer Care on Twitter, and then they have Qantas Airways on Twitter. So there's Qantas Airways is meant to be the more general conversation, not just branded messages, but conversation just generally, and also, our competitions or promotions or information and updates and stuff like that. QF Customer Care is meant to be for, customer care issues. So if they've got complaints or they've got problems, then they would go there. And then they have media as well. So for purely media, so journalists and things like that are supposed to be following that. I think, that's probably the most obvious answer, but it doesn't always work in practice because obviously people don't necessarily know that QF Customer Care is a channel to go to. But what we ended up sort of starting to do there sometimes was the customer care guys would pick it up with them anyway, because we were using Radian 6 at the time, and you have access to all of the stacks there as well. But there was some debate as to how we would handle that, because we also said, is it a bit confusing if they tweet Qantas Airways and then QF Customer Care gets back to them? So there was kind of competing ideas on how to manage that, but I think that's one idea. But at the end of the day, I just think the key is to make sure you're responding to people. So for example, on Facebook, I think you just post your branded messages, and then you respond to people individually as they're, talking to you on your wall. And then, as Chris said, if there's a major issue that's clear, if your website's got down or there's something that people are coming at you and asking questions about frequently, then you do a customer service post about that to try and minimize the extra posts. But at the end of the day, I don't think there's a problem in mixing them. Unless if you're a thing like Vodafone or Qantas, you get a lot of customer care stuff. So it's a matter of whether or not the volume warrants an extra channel.
Awesome. We'll stop there and break 5 minutes. Thank you, Cara. So, I'll throw this over to you guys. What do you think the issue was there, Chris?
Issue there. So, that's a shoot yourself in the foot one. Like, who's looking at that photo? Anyways, definitely the
30 seconds.
starting off. Okay, deleting the comments. It's a really bad one. If someone steps over, they then went back afterwards and kind of said, we're deleting the stuff that was against our user guidelines. If you do that, then you should be blocking them, because that is part of your guidelines. It's not just a delete piece. Once you've got toxic trolls, get rid of them. They're not doing your page any good, frankly. So they didn't delete and ban where it was a clear one. However, they're also just deleting other shit. They weren't honest about it. And that's where they got the part where consumers banded together and absolutely slayed them. How would I handle it differently? I would have blocked and deleted where people stepped over the line. I would have been a lot quicker about coming out and saying something defending this, or saying that maybe it was inappropriate. I think I also might have chucked my toe in the water a little bit more. Kudos to them that I think they did then step away from this as a direction in terms of comms. But I might not have gone for an image like this, because I thought something different when they said lose their chapstick, to be honest with you.
Okay, yeah, well, I mean, obviously we know what the biggest issue was the deleting of comments. I mean, from my perspective, I think that I'm not easily offended, and I'm not that conservative. I don't really have a problem with that as a picture. I'm not saying I would pick it as my ad campaign, but I guess if it was me, again, what I would have done would be let your advocate speak up for you sometimes, instead of instead of denying and deleting and things like that and putting people offside and getting that mob mentality. Sometimes you just let people fight it out on your behalf, and that happens with Qantas all the time. And I still laugh at some of the conversations that happen on their posts on Facebook, because there's so many people that bag them out no matter what, and then there's so many people that come to their defense and are on Qantas's side. And I know that there was, whilst I was there at Qantas, if you remember, which was another kind of mini crisis, I don't know if anyone remembered that image that they posted that was the football, what's his name, the rugby union guy with the afro, anyway. Yeah, and then one of the fans that had won a ticket through us via, I think it was a Twitter competition, had gone and dressed up as him, so he'd painted himself. Yeah. So that was like also another thing that happened. And I think what happened there is I think probably 75% of people kind of defended Qantas and said, we don't find this offensive. And yeah, probably it wasn't well thought out. And then we actually copped a lot of backlash for removing the picture. And I still think that we should have removed it, because it was offending people, and we removed it. And sometimes you should, if it's offensive, and say, look, we're sorry, because, obviously. But in that case, people were saying, why'd you remove it? Like, we don't think you should have. So I think sometimes you have to own what your marketing campaigns and what you've done, and let other people fight it out for you as well. So that's what I would say.
That makes sense. So one's this slide, we've got two on this slide. Does anyone know what this is about before we go into it? Okay, so the first image here is a campaign image that Nestlé put out on their Facebook page. Obviously, just an innocent beer with Kit Kat sticks playing the drums. Anyone who knows anything about internet culture would know that that beer looks incredibly similar to our friend on the right called pedo beer. Pedo beer symbolises pedophilia on the internet. So if there's a post relating to pedophilia, or if someone's sort of uncomfortable about where a commentary or something's going on something like Reddit or 4chan, really popular image boards on the internet, they'll put a picture of pedo beer up as a warning to say, you're getting into a dangerous space. Most people don't know about it. People who know about the internet and know the culture of the internet do. They put that image up. Within sort of 5 to 10 minutes, they had an avalanche of people coming in, accusing them of being pedophiles and this sort of stuff. Just the worst place you want to be for a brand. And it resulted in them pulling out this campaign, which would have cost them, I don't know, well over $200,000-300,000 to create. apologise and then go on and sort of not release another campaign for 2 months? Easy question is, what was the problem? We know what it is. What would you have done differently?
Well, the problem actually there was, I wouldn't say it, because I reckon they've got that one off that gorilla one that Cadbury did, and they've just gone and copied it. Don't, like, fuck, you could have come up with something different, honestly, but yeah.
I guess the warning here is be really, really aware, or have someone in your team who is really, really aware of what is rolling around the internet, and what, specific images are used for to convey messages online.
I suppose it comes back to Chris's bad case scenario.
Yeah, that's a bad case, but it's also the isolation point. Yeah. Because it's like someone's going, hang on, this guy did this Cadbury one and they won like all these awards, and we're going to do it, and I might get some likes or whatever it was.
So given
but that's done in isolation to someone who lives and breathes internet, who just goes, fuck me, you got Pedo Bear out as your Kit Kat brand ambassador. Like, I don't think he's going to be a hit at the park. Just kind of completely wrong in terms of how they handled it. Did they go quiet for a bit?
I think they did.
No, they pulled it and apologised. I'm just going to come in here and say I feel sorry for them. To be honest with you, I think this is an instance where we're being harsh. Yeah. Obviously, in hindsight, that was dumb. I don't know Pedo Bear, and I'd like to think I live and breathe the internet because I'm massively into social media. I write a blog on social media. I should know about that. I don't. I didn't see that, and I think it's just unfortunate that the number of people that were exposed to this didn't know about it. Obviously, they didn't know about it, so yeah, it's easy to crucify them and say you idiots, but at the same time, if you don't know something, you don't know it. You know what I mean? And so from my perspective, I think it's about how you handle it when something goes wrong. Secondly, I would say, wasn't it just an image they put on Instagram? Yeah, like it's not a $200,000 or $300,000 campaign, so let's be a bit fair that it's a small little thing that they did, which was not meant to be a big campaign, and that's why it slipped through the cracks, because they didn't have agencies and 25,000 marketing people. So
it did kick off an Instagram. It was their first image, and then they would have business cased it and thought about it and come up with a plan. And come up with that one as the first one isn't great. I do agree with being like, in the scheme of things, they did say they were like, whoops, sorry, we'll pull it down, we'll delete it from our website too. When it comes to things like this, there is no joking around of it though. You need to be on that real quick.
But I think they were largely though,
It wasn't like, when I mean quick though, like I mean inside an hour. The second you get off your first few comments, Pedo Bear, you go and fucking Google what Pedo Bear is, you find out what it is, and then you go, oh shit. And then you deal with it in that hour. I'm not saying a day. I would have literally just gone, you've got Pedo Bear out and we're promoting Pedo Bear, I'm killing this thing right now, and profusely apologising.
But isn't that, do you know how long it took them? Because I don't. I'm not saying...
I know it was a day plus.
Okay, so it was. Because I don't know, I didn't know how long it took.
No, because they got comments, and then they got people hitting their wall and all the rest of it.
Awesome. Second one, does anyone know about this, the palm oil issue with Nestle as well? So I think last year, maybe even a year and a half now, Greenpeace put out a campaign against Nestle saying they use too much palm oil, which destroys rainforests in third worlds like Cambodia and stuff like that. And Greenpeace put out a call to action to their followers to take Nestle images like this and Photoshop them, amend them to sort of essentially go against Nestle like they have done here. Instead of Kit Kat, you've got Killer. And they asked people to put those images as their profile picture, and then from that point on, anyone who posted anything to Nestle's page with those images as their profile picture, Nestle banned and deleted those comments and uses from their page, and that only further sort of exacerbated the issue, and it turned from a relatively minor issue into a global one based on that, because mainstream media jumped on it, gave it a lot of legs, and it turned into a massive problem for them. Essentially, that's a perfect case of brand hijacking on Facebook or social media. So given that has already happened to you, theoretically, what would you have done?
What we did at Vodafone was anyone that used Vodafail, we halved the SLA, so we got to it quicker.
What's
Is that
SLA? Sorry.
service level agreement?
Thank you.
So ideally, the amount of time we take to respond to something, and it varies over channels, we get there twice as quick. So I would have done the opposite of that. I would applaud I absolutely applaud the strategy of, who did it, Greenpeace?
Yeah.
Of realising that they can't affect change in palm oil manufacturers, so we've got to go after who uses it. This is a great call out to brands who think, we're sweet, we're like an FMCG, we just make chocolate bars that are happy for everyone. And there are, these are your unseen ones. And you know what? Greenpeace could have picked like heaps of people, but they just came up with a really cracking idea for Kit Kat, and so they decided to hammer on them. So tough on them. The other part to this point was, during this, the people who were responding started to get really narky with people writing the comments, and it got like quite heated. And when you stoop to that level, it's all gone. If people responding on behalf of the brand start doing that, it's, that's probably the worst mistake that you could make. The learning on that is that they would have, my guess is they didn't have real customer care people.
They admitted that for most of those comments that came through, the abrasive comments was an intern.
Yeah.
It wasn't actually a part of, wasn't an employee of the business, but was on there from a university sort of
customer care people who handle this stuff, incredible. The team I worked with at Vodafone, absolutely incredible, and really great outlook and positivity. Anyone else, if I sit there and like copped half the stuff reading, had to reply that they had to, either Nestle or Vodafone, seriously, I'd probably backlash too. But it's just that inherent positivity of a customer service person. That's why it's really important to have, and not have someone with a bit of an ego for the social media side of things.
Ms. Cara.
I just want to say, following just from what he said, which is a little bit off the topic there, it's important as well to keep in mind the people that are responding, where and how they're responding, because when I worked for Qantas, I used to just respond in my free time all the time as well as at work. So I'd go home and then sit on Qantas Twitter and respond. And I realised this was not a good idea when one night I was out to dinner having a wine with my friends, and there was some dickhead on Twitter like bagging out Qantas for some ridiculous reason. You know how sometimes it's legitimate and sometimes people are just being idiots. And I was so close to tweeting him something that was just like sarcastic and then I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? And then I banned myself. So I think that was my fault, but I think it's important from a company perspective. It probably wasn't a good idea that Qantas allowed me to just be tweeting them all day and night or whatever. So yeah, from then on I was like, well, I can't be doing this because I'm going to get myself and Qantas into a lot of trouble. But coming back to this, I think this point is another thing, and as Mike said, it's outside social media control to some degree. Obviously, we all know the way they responded was wrong, but I think the thing that you need to do in this is try to act rationally, but also try to see what the company and the brand can do, because I think you need to make sure the right facts are out there. So if it is that Greenpeace I don't 100% know the facts, like I know the campaign, but I don't know the degree of how bad the palm oil is and that sort of thing. But I think it's important to either get the facts out there, or if it is that bad, then maybe you need to address the problem from the company and change. Because it's out there and people now know that, if it's Nike hiring slave labor or whatever it might be, if people know that you're doing something wrong, then it might be time to change it because it's not going to go away. Or if they're, exaggerating it, or if it's not right, then you get out there and you put that messaging together in the best way, whether or not it's a YouTube video or just a post that outlines the facts or whatever. So from my perspective, I think that needed a wider branding, and a management kind of view as well, as obviously not being defensive and deleting things and that sort of thing as well.
Yeah, interesting one. Just touched on in terms of risk mitigation is also access to your social networks. So as Cara said, she's had a few drinks and thought about it and went no. At the start though, not everyone should just have access on their phone at any time, point in case, to a social network. It's something we really quickly removed at Vodafone. So there was only 2 people who could have access from the phone within it. And you know what? It's not because we don't trust our employees. I've met a bunch of their friends. I don't trust their friends, and I know my friends, and I don't trust them either. And so it's just trying to mitigate those factors.
And not just that, because everyone had the password at Qantas, when we got the customer care team on, we had a whole bunch of other people that had access to it as well. I can't remember, something happened where a tweet went out, or something went out that I was like, this wasn't really, it didn't cause a backlash, but I was like, this wasn't really appropriate, and no one would own up to it. And secondly, someone clicked on one of those spam links, and then we spammed, you know how they say, oh, I don't know if you've got Twitter, but you would have gotten it, oh, look at what's this rumor that's going around about you or whatever. So someone on our team has clicked that link and then spammed our thousands of followers. So that's another problem when you've got new people, especially because we had these new people that had come on the team and weren't even necessarily social savvy. And so we had these issues. So I agree with that. I think it's not a good idea to have access for everyone on their phone. Or if you do, only, like, I think I should have had access, but I shouldn't have been answering in my own time, which I then learned. I think the media team should have access, and I think someone on the social team should have access, but only to use in a case of emergency, basically.
Yeah. Awesome. Right, it's 8:30. Anyone have any questions regarding the entire night that they're wanting to ask?
Yeah, just with that, with the whole, you have to be quick, you have to respond, but also having access after hours, how do you draw that balance between, staying on top of it, answering those responses, but also, you can't be online 24/7, there are resource issues, there are budget issues, how do you deal with that?
Name the game before you play it. So any of the channels that we're on, it says really clearly when they're marked in between. In terms of people here from 8 to midnight, and anyone that would come inside and outside of it would also, you'd literally get the community coming and just go, they're not back on till 8, say it was at 7 o'clock in the morning. Another one within that you can do is automation, that I was kind of touching on earlier. So if there's certain keywords that equates to Godzilla coming,
or volume as well.
Yeah, or volume, then that actually equates an action that sends an email to a bunch of people. And then, like I said, the one with the tier, if something happens, you need to be able to call someone to make them aware of it. We had a thing where if you kind of saw 3 missed calls off someone, I don't think that's even really much of a code. I think you see 3 missed calls off someone, you're going to call them back pretty quickly. So that's kind of what we focused on. It's a cultural piece though, where you don't want your team sitting there worrying about it all the time and looking at their phones. So anyone who would answer stuff out of hours, I used to come down on it like a ton of bricks on, and it wasn't because I was afraid they were going to say something wrong or all the rest of it. I just didn't want them to be working in their time off.
And it sets an expectation then as well that you can't necessarily. So that was the problem that I had when I started doing it. I think I then set this expectation. We said that we worked 9 to 5, and then I was so studious that I'd go home and answer all these. And in my head, I was like, at least I will have some time tomorrow morning. It'll save me some time. But really, then all I was doing was setting the wrong expectation. That then if I went out one night and I wasn't doing it, people would be like, well, where is Qantas and stuff like that. I also think as well, to that point, if something is going down, people will tell you. If anything happened on Qantas, it depends on how big your brand is, but if there's anything happening, you'd be surprised how quickly someone who knows you will pick up the phone and say, oh my God, I saw this. Whether or not it's someone on your agency side, it's someone on your team, one of your friends, your family, something like that. People on Twitter are a community. If you're on Twitter, everyone knows you. A lot of people knew I was behind Qantas, because it's a small community in Australia. So people know you, and they if they see something, they'll tell you. So I think that sometimes helps as well. Sometimes
but you don't want it to get to that stage.
No, but I mean, even if there's when that football thing happened, within seconds, there was people saying stuff. But it just depends on how big your brand is as well. But I think ideally as well, if you're with something like Vodafone or Qantas, I would recommend you have someone on shifts. And that's what I did at Qantas when we got 3 people in customer care. I said, can we make it so that we're working essentially, 7 a.m. to 10, 11, because that's when flights are leaving. And they said no, which was fine. And they set that expectation that it was 9 to 5. But from my perspective, if you're working in a service-based industry where you are getting customer calls and customer issues at all times, ideally, if you have a team, it would be good if they could work shifts, but it's not always possible.
I think what's happening lately as well is not even from a customer service point of view, just from a general community management point of view, with all the new ACCC and ASB, and this is seen as advertising, people are getting a bit more pedantic as well with just, I know the rule is 24 hours, but you know, you kind of want to, even after hours, get on it straight away, and it's just kind of figuring out that
24 hours is a long time,
Yeah, it is. Look, that's the stuff where you've got to make your tools work for you with some auto, you know, filtering things out. And it is a challenge. The other thing that I think is going to come from that on the ACCC one is, as hopefully is a challenge, is where you define what quantity is. So if you look at that from a regard around YouTube and copywriting, like back in the day, and it was essentially saying, okay, YouTube, you're facilitating these fancy phones these days, that you're allowing, you're facilitating this happening. YouTube were like, okay, cool. Well, for us to get it down in 24, I think they had 48 hours. They were like, there's too much stuff. Now they've come up with really smart ways that they can do it now, but essentially there's a volume argument. If you're a brand that is getting like tens of thousands of comments in a week, like how much can you really get through on all of those and be able to flag them? I don't know. I think there's got to be some give in it. It's not a great, for those that don't know, ACCC essentially ruled that anything showing on a social media site, particularly Facebook, whether it is one of your fans who have come on and written something on it, that counts as advertising material. Thus, essentially, legally, it's got to be a fact. Someone couldn't just come on and just go, let me think about something. The Vodafone network is the best network in Australia. That would need to come down.
Otherwise, legally, that's counted as an advertising.
Correct.
Sorry. It's the stupidest rule in New Zealand.
Yeah, it is. And particularly where you start to get to some of the micro channels as well, it makes it tough. And the amount that you then would expect your customer facing people who are working on those channels to know the ins and outs, and everyone's gonna have to have a fucking law degree now before they become a community handler. Like it is a little bit ridiculous.
Awesome. Any other questions? We're 10 minutes over.
Just one quick one. Not specifically about crisis management, but when you're doing sort of your brand communications, and you're talking about that you have teams, how do you maintain the sort of the tone and the personality of the voice? Like, is it just one person that writes it all, or
No.
you share it?
No, you just put your name on the end of it. I'd speak about it from Vodafone perspective. You go on a channel, you literally see a bunch of people's photos with their names next to it, and people would be associating that Kirsty speaks in a certain way and Tim does and all the rest of it. That's what I'm talking about reactively, so responding to someone. On a proactive perspective, there should be some form of, anyone can write the content and all the rest of it, there should be some form of metric or benchmark that you're then kind of approving it to. I really use approving really loosely because it slows down the process, but there should be something that you then benchmark it to.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for coming. We'll put in an email tomorrow inviting you guys to the Facebook. We've got a private Facebook group that's growing pretty fast at the moment. We'll throw you into that if you want, and we'll give you an invite, and all you have to do is ask to be invited and we'll put you in. And we're looking to have our third roundtable around the 15th of December, so not too far away. Thank you all so much.